Let me begin by begging for your latitude, and those who are going to watch this video, I recommend watching it on 1.5 speed because I'm not making it up as I go, but I don't have a prepared work in front of me as to what I have to say, and what I have to say is somewhat complex. So, so fair warning, okay. I'm working on a longer written piece right now. I think it'll end up being something like a longer essay that I'll end up publishing in some form, and it expands explicitly on what I call my 1990 thesis, and that is, there's a lot of effort to understand what's called woke or wokeness, and before that was called political correctness or PC. And in between somewhere was they started talking about SJWs and social justice warriors. That whole thing, that whole phenomenon, that whole plague, um, to me, or not just to me, this is not just a subjective thing. This is my assessment of history for whatever it's worth. I think it began in 1990, and I think it began in 1990 or right around 1990 with the concomitant collapse of the Soviet Union. I strongly suspect that there is a causal relationship between the fall of the Soviet Union and the rise of political correctness in the West. I think the end of the Soviet Union signaled the beginning of this new form of intellectual tyranny really taking hold in the West, and I don't think it was accidental. Without going into great detail about anything here, let me just say that the way in which I think this happened, I'm not going to expound here on the reasons for it or what I believe the reasons for it to be, but the form that it took, because people will say, "Oh, you're wrong, Nowicki. PC was around in the 80s. It was around in the 70s and the 60s. And it's true. There were liberal ideas. There was feminism. There were anti-white notions, critiques of white colonialism, as they would be called. There was gay rights activism there, and there were all kinds of movements, and there were all kinds of political and social beliefs that were around well before 1990. The difference is that in 1990 they gained steam. They suddenly gained steam, and they suddenly got amplified positively in a way that they were not being positively amplified before. Before 1990, since I'm critical about a lot of things about the current state of America, but I will say one really great thing about America is freedom of speech. And to my mind, I think it's the only country in the world that has freedom of speech enshrined, and where you really can't touch someone's freedom of speech. Now, someone can get destroyed for saying the wrong thing legally, or not legally, but socially, professionally, and all that. For saying the wrong thing, I should have put the implied quotation marks. I should have made those explicit there. That is true, but in every other country in the world, I think, maybe I'm missing someone, but I think I'm pretty sure everywhere else, you can't be completely sure that you're not going to get a knock on the door at two in the morning, and the Stasi come for you, or it might be something less dramatic. It might just be, that you get fined, or jailed for a few weeks, like seems to be routinely happening in the UK to people who make naughty tweets, or in Canada, just anywhere else in the West, anywhere else in the Western world, there is no enshrined freedom of speech that is completely legally protected to the extent that it is in the United States. So all of these ideas were legal. It was legal to express them, and there were movements, around them, especially gained steam in the 60s, and 70s. These what could be called subversive movements. This counterculture, which of course I also tend to think has had a lot of backing from some very powerful forces that it was in many ways the counterculture was in many ways a deep state pushed phenomenon. I agree with the author of Strange Scenes in the Canyon, or Weird Scenes in the Canyon, on that score. But in any case, the ideas of political correctness did not start to get amplified until right around 1990. And I want to give an example of this because unlike probably most people watching this video, I'm old enough to remember the pre-woke era. The pre-woke era was not the aughts, the way that some people talk about it. They say, "Wow, look at the kind of things that were in movies back then." People could say "faggot" in a comedy movie. Boy, that sure didn't age well. And I think they have this wrong or mistaken idea. Yes, things have accelerated. Things have gotten worse since around 2015, 2016, when they got kicked into high gear, and things lurched into this kind of hyper. I don't even know what to call it. Things just all of the trends that were happening more slowly, more copacetically, and less coercively, suddenly got kicked into high gear right around 2015 up to the present. Now, they also accumulated a backlash, because there's always a backlash. Whenever there's an action, there's always an equal and positive reaction. So don't think of this as all going one way either. Don't be black-pilled, and don't be doom-pilled, and don't say, it's just going to get worse and worse. It's gotten worse and worse, and it's just going to get worse and worse, and there's nothing we can do about it, and we're cooked, we're done, it's over. Don't keep that shit away from me, okay? That kind of rhetoric. Can't stand it. But the truth is that it wasn't the aughts. It certainly wasn't the 90s, because I remember the 90s when political correctness started to take over, and it was like, what in the world? Why is this happening? Why is this being pushed from all these high places now? Why is it being given so much oxygen? Why are we, when the Atlanta Braves made it to the World Series in 1991, why are we being lectured about how demeaning the tomahawk chop is? in 1991. Nobody complained about things like that in the 80s, or if they did, people complained about it, but it didn't get the same kind of exposure or the same kind of approval. There are I don't know what should we call them, overlords. There are people who have the power to push ideas on the rest of us, and we're not immune to pressure to conform. Some of us resist it, some of us fight it, some of us are contrarians, or we see the lack of logic of something and aren't afraid to talk about it. Others just shrug and say, well, I guess this is the way things are right now, and I don't want to get in trouble, so I'm just going to go along with it. And I think that accounts for, unfortunately, maybe the majority of us, because we are, as human beings, we do want to fit in. We, to quote Charles, or to quote Patrick Bateman, who fits into this scene very well, because American Psycho was one of the book American Psycho was one of the first victims of political correctness. It was about to be published by a major publisher, Simon and Schuster, and then there was a revolt from within, and the corporates said, nope, we can't have this book. This book is it's horrible. It's violent. It's violently misogynistic, and we can't publish this. So they actually reneged, and the author, Bret Easton Ellis, had to start over again. He said he had to find another publisher. He managed to, and the book managed to get out there, but it was widely canceled, and Ellis was one of the first people to get canceled, and that was I think 1991. Okay, but just a mere 4 years prior to that, something happened, and that I want to talk about here. This is an anecdotal incident that I want to report, which to me shows how things were different before 1990, even as close to 1990 as 1987 was. Still, things were very different. I don't think anyone in the West anticipated that within 2 or 3 years the Soviet Union was going to be gone. Nobody saw that coming. There was some excitement about the possibility that the Cold War, there could be a thaw in the Cold War, with Gorbachev being interested in having talks with Reagan about reducing the nuclear arsenal, and with Gorbachev again pushing what was called glasnost, this idea of greater openness, more freedom within the Soviet Union. But the notion that the Berlin Wall was going to come down in late 1989, and that all of communism, the entire Eastern Bloc, was going to fall in 1990, and I guess officially in 91, although it was pretty much all gone by 1990. That was a pipe dream. That was something nobody thought was possibly going to happen. The Cold War was always going to be with us. There was always going to be East and West. There was always going to be the communist East, and the capitalist West, and that all changed, and in what seemed like the twinkling of an eye. But with that change came political correctness, And again, I'm going to write about why I think those two events are related. That's what I'm working on writing right now. But I'm in this video. It's anecdote. It's finally 15 minutes in. It's anecdote time. Let no one complain that I'm long-winded or rambling. Let no one do that. I told you to watch this on 1.5 speed. All right. If you're bored, if you're thinking this is taking forever, come on, no, we can get to the point. Then I told you. I told you what you were in for, and you should have turned off a long time ago. So, in 1987, I was very much a liberal. I mean, I was a leftist. I was incredibly naive, and I didn't know. I was 16 years old. I didn't know what the hell I was talking about, like most 16-year-olds don't. But I had my little opinions, as a church lady would say. We have our little opinions, don't we? I had my little opinions. I carried around a copy of Marx's Communist Manifesto at my public school, and which was fairly conservative place. And I wanted to stand out. I wanted to show everyone where I really stood, and that I wasn't like them. And so that was that was what I believed in back then. And in 1987, I of course grew up in the state of Georgia, and the school I was going to at the time was a suburban high school just outside of Atlanta, in Metro Atlanta, and at the time, the Georgia state flag contained the now almost completely forbidden so-called stars and bars. The Confederate battle flag, the X with the stars in them. The design that I'm talking about. Today it's almost totally outlawed, and if somebody sees you flying that flag, they assume things about you. But in the South in the 1980s, it was just people were sort of more easygoing about it. Liberals still hated it, and I was one of them. I was against it. Liberals thought it represented slavery. To other people, it was just pride in our Southern heritage. But in any case, it was part of the Georgia state flag, right? And at the time, I was in a class called Impact, which was the so-called gifted class, and weirdly enough, the Impact room was almost had this kind of was almost cool. Now I wasn't cool. I'm not claiming I was cool, but there was this kind of it had this allure to it. Like there was something. There were certain popular kids who were good looking but made good grades and were headed for college, and the Impact room was like the citadel for them. So so that's neither here nor there, but it's just kind of an interesting thing to note. And going to Impact every day was for that 50 minutes or so of classroom time. It was during second period for me. It was like you could catch your breath there. It was you could take a break from all of this like rigid kind of high school, keep to the right side of the hall, follow the dress code, blah blah blah. We still had to follow the dress code in the Impact room, but I hope you know what I'm saying. It was a more laid back kind of atmosphere. There were couches that you could sit on, and people could have conversations as long as it didn't get too disruptive. And everyone had a project they were working on, and they had to put a certain amount of time in on that project. And then at the end of the semester, you would present something relating to your project. That was the whole. That was what we did in Impact. So I figured this would be the Impact Room would be the place to post my petition to change the Georgia state flag. I made an argument for why the Georgia state flag ought to be changed, and I put it up on the bulletin board in the Impact Room, thinking that, and left room for some signatures. And I don't know. I guess that if my plan was I would send it somewhere, I send it to the Georgia State Assembly, and then I'm sure it would just get ignored. But it was just something I thought would be a good thing to do, and I did think it was important that the stars and bars be taken out of the Georgia state flag. That was how I felt back then. Not how I feel now, but I had my own transformation of thought, which started in college and was not unrelated to political correctness, by the way. I think without political correctness really pushed me to reject my earlier adopted beliefs much faster than if there had not been political correctness. But I understand when people talk about, I was a Democrat, but the Democrats left me, or the left left me. I get that. I get when people say that, because the left was a different kind of phenomenon before it had this kind of almost totalitarian power. Before. Well, let me just finish my story first. Talk about what happened with my petition. So I posted it, and I thought, these are smart kids. Probably most of them are liberal too, or I knew a lot of them were, so I'll probably get some signatures, and probably in my mind I thought this, people will think that it's cool that I did this, and I'll get more friends and get more popular. I mean, I have to admit that, it was kind of a geeky way to try to obtain greater popularity. I did have a conviction. It wasn't, just for that, but I kind of, had, I would be lying if I was saying that wasn't a component of it. But my petition was a complete bust. I gave it a few days, and maybe 2 or 3 people signed, but hardly anybody signed. And a bunch of people took Georgia state flag stickers and stuck them on the petition, like to show, to ridicule me, and to show how much how stupid my petition was. All right, and so it failed, and I took it down, and I licked my wounds, and I moved on with my paperback copy of the Communist Manifesto, in tow, next to my Trapper Keeper. No, I didn't have a Trapper Keeper in 10th grade, but I did have, binders and stuff, whatever, the stuff you carried around with you in high school. Now, in 1987, it was, a petition to take down the Georgia state to redesign the Georgia state flag got absolutely no traction. And there was no, today, I think if if I had tried something similar and it had gotten the same result, I would have I would be able to take that, like, that petition with all these all these people had put their hate symbols all over it. I'd be able to take that to the principal's office, and then there would probably be there would ensue some kind of like we're going to go after the students who dare to do this, and you know how things are right now with certain opinions and beliefs that you're just not supposed to have, and that if you run into problems from people, and especially if they use certain words or brandish certain symbols, then they can really get in trouble. That's the reality of today. That's the reality of what things have been, the way things have been since 1990. Prior to 1990, I just shrugged, took my petition down, and went about my business. And generally speaking, other people who agreed with me, I did get some people who told me, "Hey, I like your petition. I think it should." I signed it, or I would have signed it. I meant to sign it or something. I did get people who told me things like that. But there wasn't the same kind of like, oh, how outrageous it is that people disagree with us. How outrageous that we have to deal with this. These people need to be need to be brainwashed into believing the things that we know to be true. There wasn't that kind of manufactured outrage about this subject. It was just, where do you feel about this Georgia state flag? Well, here's the argument for keeping it. Here's the argument for changing it. And if you feel one way, that's interesting. If you feel the other way, that's interesting. And and there you go. And didn't we have an interesting debate? It was that kind of thing. We learned a lot in this debate, and we had a lot of people express very interesting ideas on both sides, and I mean that was the spirit of things back then. All right, there wasn't this we got to go after the people who we think are bad and make them change their minds, or else cause them to be absolute pariahs from polite society. Take away their bank accounts. Ensure that they get fired from their jobs. That there wasn't that same kind of rabid mentality. But there was still liberalism. It didn't have the same kind of power, and it claimed at the time to believe in non-coercion, or non-coercive tactics as one of its tenets. If you were a liberal, you were in favor of freedom of speech, no matter who was getting their speech infringed upon. Right? You were in favor of those sorts of things, and I think for some people who were liberal or called themselves liberal at the time, they might have just been lying, or being disingenuous, and that as soon as they got power, they would crack down on freedom of speech. But that wasn't how I felt. That wasn't how a lot of people felt. And that's why I say I can understand when people talk about how the left left me. I didn't leave the left. I can understand that, because the left changed significantly in becoming coercive, in enforcing its tenets rather than expressing them and demanding that it be able to express its tenets, and that people be allowed to believe the things that it believes. and to try to change people's minds, by getting them to understand. It became something different in 1990. It became this coercive phenomenon. Not immediately, it gained steam through the years. It was in 1990 that we first started to hear about how you don't really have a right to this opinion. If you're a straight white male, you don't really have a right. Your opinion doesn't count. If you don't think the tomahawk chop should be banned, your opinion doesn't count, because you're just a white male, and a straight white male too, even though for the Indians saying, "Hey, we're not gay. Don't imply that we're gay." That's what they would have said at the time. But yeah, so that's just an anecdote to illustrate what was going on, and thank you for sticking through this whole thing. I'll maybe make a shorter video of this with just the anecdote later, but thanks for watching.